Thank you, Johan, and thank you for being here. I'm really happy to be here. I was one of the people raising up my hand this morning. This is the first time I've been to this conference. Great talks so far, so I'm looking forward to this afternoon as well. My name is Jonas, and I'm head of software platform and shared services at the Swedish Migration Agency. There might be some confusion. Some of the speakers today talked about IT migration projects. So the Swedish Migration Agency doesn't work with IT migration. We work with people and immigration. So one of our main missions is to process applications for asylum seekers. And as you might know, this is one of the big global questions today, in parallel with the question about the environment. There's actually the highest number of refugees we've seen so far in the world right now. A small percentage of these comes to Europe. Even smaller percentage comes to Denmark and Sweden. The Migration Agency, our job is to handle these applications as quick as possible. So for example, this is Khaldoun. We interviewed him a couple of years ago. He came to Sweden in 2015. Sweden, at that year, we received 150,000 asylum seekers. So he had to spend 2 years waiting for his decision. And as you can see in the interview, this is some of the quotes he had. These 2 years, he was nobody in Sweden. He couldn't work. He had to stay in a refugee housing. So he lost his smile for 2 years. So our mission is to process these applications as quick as possible to minimize the suffering of these people that comes to our country to want to stay with us. We also do a lot of other things and then process applications for the asylum seekers. We also help people that want to reunite with their families, help people that want to come and visit Sweden, maybe work or study, and also people that want to become Swedish citizens. Our agency has more than 6,000 employees right now. In our development department, we have around 450 people, including some consultants. We have around 18 software development teams, mostly Scrum teams. And as you can see, we have more than 7 billion potential customers and users that might be using our system some time in the future. So we're mostly a traditional IT enterprise. How many of you work in large enterprises? Okay, so we have 1,000 lines of legacy code. We have sometimes trouble delivering code to production. 2 years ago, around 80% of all of our deliveries were done on a monthly basis. And I will share some insights that we had, and most of you who have worked in large enterprises hopefully or not hopefully, but you probably have heard them as well. So you can nod your head if you recognize yourself in this. So we heard this before, this morning, and in other talks. The future is already here. The technology innovation is accelerating. Everything is connected. 10 years ago, we might have published an electronic service on a web page. Now, our asylum seekers, everyone has a phone. They don't travel with a PC. They have a phone, a smartphone. And in a couple of years, they might want to be able to access our systems with a smartphone or another smart device. So we need to handle this. Also, as we heard of Camille this morning, software is eating the world. We are more and more dependent on software. And every company is becoming a software company. This means that we, as traditional enterprises who are not used to building software as the traditional tech companies, we need to look at software companies and see how do they manage people and handle work and manage the software systems. But we have technical debt. We have some systems from the 90s, and this is something that slows us down. It's getting more and more difficult to connect everything, and it's getting more difficult to use the new technology when we have old technology as well. And this creates complexity. And we must realize that complexity is everywhere. Not only is the software itself complex, and the infrastructure and the servers and network layers complex. The people that are building, managing, and operating and using our software, they themselves is a complex system. So we must look at our enterprises and our software as a complex adaptive system. And what do we know about complex adaptive systems? We heard this morning a little bit about that. Change is what is happening all the time in a complex system, which means that we will never have a perfect information about the whole system. And no one can actually grasp the complete story about the system. Which means that we can never predict 100% what will happen if we do a change in the system. On your right side, this is actually a visualization of one part of our software system. It's not the newest one, but it's a couple of years old. But this is a subset of software modules that we have and their dependencies. And imagine we have 19 teams doing changes in specific modules. We will see that it will affect the system somehow. Another team might be changing a more critical component, and that will have effect on the system. And this is only the software. It doesn't reflect the network and infrastructure below, which also changes during time. So this means that we must look at this as something else than just a traditional complicated problem. It's a complex problem that we need to handle. I love this quote by Dr. Richard Cook from the DevOps Enterprise Summit last year. It's not surprising that your systems sometimes fail. What's surprising is that it ever works at all. So we need a new mindset to look at software development. The problem is that we have management principles and methods that are based on wrong assumptions. Does everybody know who Frederick Taylor was? He was the man behind the scientific method of organizing factories, assembly lines. Maximizing the throughput through a factory was his contribution to the industry. He became famous because it worked really well, because in a factory you have a predictable environment, repetitive work, you do large batches, and you can divide your work into work centers or silos where everyone becomes specialized in their own task. You can scale. If you have one assembly line, you can have two and you almost double the throughput. But the effects are very costly. You need to do a great design, because if you produce thousands of units and they are defective, it will cost very much for the organization. The problem is that business and software development is not a factory. It is a creative knowledge work, so we cannot compare with the assumptions done in a factory. And we cannot use the old methods and principles that Frederick Taylor had. So the problem is, as Gary Hamel said, we have a 21st century internet-enabled business process, but we use old methods and processes and management principles, because we have another set of assumptions. We live in a world which is a VUCA world, volatile, unpredictable, complex, and adaptive. And we create unique solutions every time when we build software and change our business. And another difference is that we can deliver software in parts, doing MVPs, not delivering the whole batch at one in a big bang. So, if we look, how many recognize their own organizational structure on this part of the slide? This is how we are designed, but we're facing another problem, and this is one issue. These type of organizations create what we call information hierarchies. That information is siloed or filtered between the layers in the organization in both ways. This means that we will make decisions on probably not a whole set of information that we need. Maybe the wrong information, and we will make wrong decisions or bad decisions. Often our organization also is siloed. We heard many speakers talk about this today as well. The issue with this is, first of all, it creates delays between workstations, but it also filters information along the way. For example, if you divide your development into a set of group working with the users and customers, one set of people doing the design and the architecture, and you have one set of people implementing, you will lose information along the way, and you will lose, for example, the understanding and the purpose of why you're building the feature that you're actually building. And this is something we saw in our development teams when we talked with them. Many IT teams in our members of the teams, didn't really understand. They got a Jira ticket and they implemented a feature and they delivered it to production, but they didn't really understand why, and they didn't get any feedback how the actual implementation worked. So this is an issue that we need to solve. What we also know is that motivation is quite low in our organizations. You probably heard of the different types of studies. I think they always do every year. You see one study of engagement and motivation. And what you can see is that only 16% globally of our workforce is fully engaged. So this is a big issue if we have people that come to work and doesn't feel engaged, because we also know from the State of DevOps report that if you have highly engaged workers, you will grow revenue much better than if you have low engagement. And we also know that we need to build a high trust environment for the people to perform well. So, what we need to do? Well, we need to increase motivation. We need to create a culture of trust. And we need to embrace complexity somehow. And create adaptability. And remove silos. And handle change faster. So how do we do this? How many recognize the problems that I talked about? Many of you, at least. Well, we weren't the first people having these problems. There's a big community doing the work for us. So we didn't reinvent anything new. We looked at what other people's done, and this is not only the complete list, this type of conference as well. The book Accelerate by Nicole Forsgren was mentioned today as well. Everybody probably knows the work by Gene Kim and Jess Humble, the Phoenix Project and the DevOps Handbook. So we read these books and tried to figure out how should we actually do this type of change. We wanted to move from one way of working to another, and one way of organizing to another. So we wanted to think big, but we wanted to start small and learn fast. And what most of this work looks at is that you want to start with a business process and a business value stream. So we actually created one new team which was aligned to one business value stream. This was not how we organized our teams before. We organized our teams in terms of systems. One IT team was responsible for managing and developing one system. Now we wanted to look at the business value stream instead. Another way of changing the organization. So we took one of those. We actually took the one in the bottom, how to become a Swedish citizen. This was 1 year ago. At that time we had a 2-year delay if you wanted to become a Swedish citizen, because we have had a lot of people coming to Sweden last couple of years, last 5 years. They now want to become Swedish citizens. So we have a long waiting time with a lot of delays on the way. And this was something we wanted to change. So we created one team with one mission: decrease the waiting time for the applications for Swedish citizenship. And we actually created a new type of team. Traditionally we had Scrum teams with IT people. So we created a larger team this time with the business and IT together. So we actually have a team which is around 15 people, bigger than the 2-slice pizza team if you don't have big pizza slices. And we actually have developers, testers, architects, IT security people. We have 2 people from the business, which have business experts and case handlers. They actually do the actual work in the business, so they understand the problems that the Swedish citizenship units have. So we wanted to connect the business and IT into a new type of team. And we want them to change the way they were working. And we believe that this bigger team, the contextual and shared understanding that the people in the team will have, is so much better than dividing the work into silos. So how do we increase the motivation? We knew that 16% was fully engaged, the rest was not. So if you look into, for example, the research done by Daniel Pink in the book Drive, he mentioned 4 things that drive motivation. It is a sense of purpose, which we create by the team working very, very close with the business and to the users and the customers, so they understand why they are here. Mastery, they get to do what they are best at. Autonomy, we want the team to become autonomous, to make their own decisions, and we want them to feel a sense of belonging. So, we want the team to be empowered to build and deliver customer and user value as quickly and safely and independently as possible, as mentioned in one of the new recently books by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais, Team Topologies. So, we wanted them to optimize for flow. Instead of optimizing resources, we wanted to optimize the flow, both the flow inside the team to deliver ideas to production as fast as possible, but also look at the business value stream. How does the process of the handling of applications does in the Swedish citizenship? When we get an application, what are the steps to actually get a decision? So we started with the value stream. This was the first 2-day event we did when we started the team a year ago. So the first thing they started to look at was trying to do a value stream of one of the type of applications that the Swedish citizenship handles. And they looked at the value-added tasks, and they looked at the delays on the way, and tried to optimize and remove bottlenecks inside the value stream. So this is their mission, to remove the bottlenecks in order to get a faster flow of applications from application to decision. We also wanted them to change the way they were thinking and working. We wanted to remove all the old rituals and start from a blank page, because we only wanted them to introduce rituals that they were needing, not the ones that they were reading in a Scrum guide, for examples. And we wanted them to feel and think like a startup inside the enterprise. They had one small mission to decrease the application and waiting time, and how they did it was their own way of working and their own decision. So we wanted them to use the thinking about lean startup, framing hypothesis and doing bets, and trying to validate or falsify the hypothesis as fast and cheap as possible by doing validated learning. So they frame a hypothesis that if we do this change, we will decrease the waiting time by 2 weeks, for example. And then they should try to validate as soon as possible, as fast as possible, to see if that's a good hypothesis to work on. So that requires fast feedback loops, and it requires another type of culture where you do experimentation and you are able to fail. So, in a big organization where we're not really used to failing, this is a shift in mindset. So we need to be talking about failures as something positive instead of something negative. That failure is learning, and failing is the new normal. In a complex system, we will fail when we deliver software. We must understand that. But we need to teach the team how to do that. How to fail in a good way, fail and learn. So they need to build software that are expected to fail. They cannot think that everything is running all the time. And also, we need to create organizations that can handle failures, because they will happen. And there's this Accelerate State of Deborahs report has been mentioned previously as well. You can find a lot of good stuff in this report, because here you can see what actually is working. And if you look at the elite companies, the elite performers, they are actually delivering faster, but they are having a lower change failure rate, which is not that intuitive if you talk to a head of IT, for example, that we want to deliver faster because it's going to be less risk. But that's what statistics says as well. And in this report, you can also, I'm not going to go through this graph, it's small text, but it shows how everything is connected. if you work with continuous delivery and when you work with culture, you will increase software delivery performance. So I recommend looking into this because it will guide you also what type of technical practices you should focus on to drive continuous delivery. And of course, we need to focus on continuous improvements as well. And we need to understand that improving daily work is even more important than doing the daily work itself. We cannot neglect that part of our work. So we see this work as a continuum because the business value stream is a continuous. It won't change. We will always deliver Swedish citizenship for Sweden, for the government. So the team should be a continuous teamwork. It's not a fixed project. It's not a fixed date when they are finished. We want them to learn the business and be part of the business, to develop the business. And we want them to always generate new hypotheses. So during this last year, they have had multiple hypotheses. Some they will fail in one day. Some will take 6 months, depending on if there's a big type of work you need to do. So they will always work in a continuum by creating new hypotheses, validating, falsifying, and trying to continuously learn all the time and always deliver value to the business. So what have we learned? Well, we learn a lot. But setting a mission and goal is really important for the team to feel and know what they're going to aim at, of course. We see that some of the traditional work disappear because we combine all the roles in one team, so we don't need the handoffs, which might decrease the documentation, for example. We also see that the teams themselves, they will create minimal valuable rituals. So when they started off, we said, no rituals at all. Start working. And after a couple of weeks, they realized, okay, we should start with some dailies, to have daily meetings to understand what everyone is doing today. So they introduced small dailies in the morning, stand-ups. After a while, they introduced retrospectives because they wanted to become even better. So they started to introduce their own rituals based on what their specific needs. Then, of course, we combine roles that are not used to working in this type of teams. So it was a bit uneasy for some people in the beginning. We needed to coach in agile, coach in lean, coach in architecture, for example. So we coached them pretty actively the first months. Now they're more or less self-working, self-improving. Also, you need to provide alignment to overall strategy. If you want, for example, one of the strategies we have is we want to automate as much as possible of the decisions. So this team has automated the first decisions for this agency ever this year. And we've seen that the team has become truly agile because there have been some changes inside the citizenship units, new laws that have passed during the last year. And when the unit has received the changes, the team has adapted and created hypotheses to help the business even better. So since they don't have a fixed project with a fixed end in mind, they are able to pivot if they see changes in the business. And we've actually seen increased engagement and motivation in the team members. So here are some quotes that actually 3 of the team members have said during the last year. One of them is actually tired when he comes home because he's so engaged. He actually wants to solve the problem for the applicants to shorten the lead times. There's one team member who actually was thinking about leaving the agency, but now, after moving into this team, enjoys it so much that he wants to be a part of it. And we have actually one who said it's the most fun since 1997, and we'll try to beat that. I don't know what happened in 97. So what next? We're going to start up 2 new teams because it's been a success inside the agency. This month we will start 1 new team, and in January the 3rd team. But this is just a small step on a bigger transformation. So we have much to learn, and I would be happy to talk to you guys who have been doing this and learn even more. Thank you so much.
We have time for a few questions. If you're up for the... No pressure.
This with minimal viable rituals. How do you think about individuals versus the team? So if there are some rituals that are more important to some members of the team and that in large are something used by the agile communities, but there are some people in the team who don't think it's important, how do you handle that?
First, we tried to teach, when we started the team, we went through some theories about the principles behind Agile and Lean, and so I think most of the team members understand why we need to introduce some of the rituals, but I think that's the most important thing. So everyone should understand why, have the shared understanding. And there's always going to be people who disagree. We actually said that the team should always decide on their own. We haven't pointed out one leader, and that has worked. It has worked for 1 year. They haven't had any conflicts that we have seen as a trouble. So I guess it's always going to be some people who won't find an agreement, but that's typical work, I guess. It doesn't really matter how you organize. So if you get a good culture, that wouldn't be a problem. So, any more questions?
No? Thank you. You have now... Yes?